Hey guys, good evening and welcome back. We are back with another commentary video for the Summer of Arcade Summer Special 2023. Today we are going to be going over Metal Slug 4, how awful I am at it, and to be honest with you, none of this commentary is planned. I'm still doing it off the cuff, rambling incoherently as everybody has come to expect. I'm glad to see you all here, and I hope you enjoy your stay. So at this point, Metal Slug, I think, had been more of the same old and stuff. We have a couple of changes here and there, but not really anything noteworthy, mainly scenery changes and the occasional technical overhaul. Like, I find that around this point in the Metal Slug franchise's lifespan, the frame rate was getting better. They were learning how to just do it better and better and better. Metal Slug 2, I still think, is the king of tanked frame rates. It just did not run well, and I find that I enjoy Metal Slug 4 a lot more than most of the others because the weapons are actually a lot nicer. This time around, the damage ratios on them are a lot better. I like the dual SMGs. It seems like SMK, when you go and you look at this game, SNK, sorry, decided that they wanted to double down on the fun factor of it. So this one's not like cripplingly hard like all the other ones. Like, they wanted to sit there and focus more on creating a solid gameplay experience versus how much money they could leech out of you at the arcade. And so I can actually appreciate that and stuff because they wanted to create a more playable experience, and when you're willing to go and put the experience in front of the money that you can potentially make, I think it just creates a much better outcome in terms of enjoyment. So with Metal Slug 4, I enjoyed it a fair bit because of a lot of the scenery and stuff. I like the driving sequences, and I find that Metal Slug 4 is also incredibly fun with a friend. Like, Metal Slug 4 feels like more of a contemporary action movie, I think. You know, like the older ones, it was all about going Rambo and stuff, and then with the later titles for Metal Slug, there was like a lot more chase scenes and fighting vehicles and stuff. Typical of what you would see in action movies from, I'd have to say, the mid-80s all the way up to the 90s and stuff. So the change in focus was actually really, really nice, and I like it. Of course, we still have the standard stuff. We're going to send a gaggle of fucking choppers after you, and you're going to have to shoot them out of the sky. You know, that's a mainstay. It's nothing really new. I doubt it's ever going to change. You know, even with the newer titles that they say that they have planned, I'm still expecting to see this crap somewhere down the line. But at this point, it's important to realize that with a lot of these Metal Slug titles, they were kind of, in many ways, released back to back to back. And so when you go and you have titles being released back to back to back, obviously there's going to be a lot of asset recycling, which is fine. But the thing that I think SNK had really done well with a lot of these titles is the assets that they do go and recycle. They use them in very unique ways. Like, the ones that should stay the same ideally stay the same, but there's also other assets that they reuse and stuff that they find new creative ways of using them. And I really respect that and stuff. We still see a lot of that today with companies like Capcom. You know, most recent examples being Resident Evil 7 and 8. Resident Evil 7 had a really huge roster of reused assets for its DLC, which makes sense. And then Resident Evil 8 also had a lot of reused assets and a lot of reused code, which is, again, fine, but they managed to tweak it and tune it to where it seemed original, which I think is kind of the important thing, because with gaming, I find that players have a tendency to get bored if you constantly sell them the same game over and over. So part of the magic of Metal Slug and a lot of other Japanese games that reuse assets and stuff is I find that they're always getting creative with how they choose to reuse them. Sometimes it'll be a mild color palette swap, as we see with Metal Slug X. Other times it'll be like an existing enemy type and they'll like maybe change a helmet or something on them. You know, like they try to keep it as original as possible to make you believe that you're getting a fresh experience every time. And so as an end result, you know, these games are able to come out faster. They would also be, a lot of the time, cheaper to develop and stuff. And so that helps them maintain long-term financial viability. We see the same, out of all the Japanese companies, I think, we see the same with FromSoft and stuff. FromSoft is kind of the king of reusing assets and stuff. We saw that with Kingsfield, we also saw with Dark Souls, Armored Core, of course, like all of their titles and stuff, but they would always figure out how to do new things with them. A lot of the time the weapons would be recycled. Metal Slug is no different in this regard, like any of them really. Every now and then we may have a new asset for like a boss or something, but the enemies are still the same, a lot of the attack patterns are still the same, formations are still the same, and so it allows them to just maintain better financial viability and stuff, which is really, really healthy. And they're really willing to go and try to do new things with old assets, so this keeps the player entertained, which is also really healthy, because when people feel like they're buying the same game over and over again, they pretty much just kind of stop buying that game, as we see with the declining sales for Call of Duty. So with all the Metal Slugs, they succeed very well in conveying this. You know, like a lot of the familiarity is there, but there's also enough new stuff to go and keep the player entertained. So when you go and you buy these games, or when you go and you play these games, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to still be fighting the same nameless military. Maybe there'll be aliens, maybe not. You know, we're going to have like the same tanks and stuff. And, you know, so I think with players it kind of breeds a certain level of comfort, because they're like, oh, it's a Metal Slug game, I know what to expect. But on the other side of the coin, they're like, okay, well, they're doing something kind of new. We got new environments, you know, we have the occasional new enemy. And so it's this balance, I think, with gaming that really kind of gives it longevity and stuff. And we see the same thing with other arcade titles as well, you know, and Metal Slug was not the only one to do this. And we also see it with a lot of home titles as well, like we see it with Resident Evil, for example. Silent Hill would reuse a lot of things as well. Anything that FromSoft makes, you know, all of them are really good at taking old assets and then balancing it with new assets. That way you don't feel like you're buying the same shit over and over again. And I can appreciate that. You know, it helps them keep the doors open, it helps keep costs low, things like that. And then we have some companies that they just do kind of straight rips, where it's literally the same shit over and over and over again. And as an end result, the company, well, most of them are actually starting to go out of business now, because they're like, we're doing yearly releases, but it's like same guns, same camos, same everything. Like, we're kind of experiencing a decline in military shooters as an end result of this. A lot of the things that are kind of going to hell as well is a lot of the stuff in Assassin's Creed, like that entire franchise and a lot of Ubisoft's games, are heavily recycled. You know, like they do have new things in them, but everything is, like everything else, is so heavily recycled that people are like, geez, dude, I feel like I'm playing the same shit all the time. And as an end result, you know, sales typically aren't as strong for things like that. You know, and so, you know, it's kind of weird, because like the whole recycling of assets thing's been going on for a while now. It's not new. Metal Slug goes and demonstrates this wholeheartedly, and you know, it's just kind of interesting, because this game is coming up on, oh man, 30 years of life, literally. And it kind of demonstrates the developers were thinking about cutting costs even back then. So, but it's not the fact that they're cutting costs that's really relevant, it's how well they can go and recycle things while keeping it entertaining. And then realizing when you have to add new stuff to keep the game fresh. So with Metal Slug, it's these incremental upgrades that actually go and do a really good job of keeping the games familiar enough so you realize that you're going to have a good time with it, and that you can actually trust it as a title, because a lot of gamers have a tendency to game throughout a progression of various series. Like, you'll have a person go and buy like a Doom game knowing that it's going to be fun because all the other ones are pretty fun. And then same thing with Resident Evil and like all those other really old, long-standing franchises that are still around, still selling well. You know, and Metal Slug does this really well as well, except the only difference is Metal Slug was more of an arcade franchise and not so much a home franchise. It did hit homes at some point with the AES, of course, and, you know, for those that could actually afford that fucking thing. And then the Neo Geo disc system as well, the Neo Geo CD. And so they eventually did find Second Life, but even before consoles really rose to prominence the way that they were doing in the 90s, they were still thinking about, when making arcade games, they were still thinking about cost reduction. And so we still get new things like this boss is new, you know, and it's just fun going and fighting what is essentially a pillar with a bunch of weapons. And of course you got the reused asset for the soldier there with the RPG, well, missile launcher. And so that's why, one of the many reasons why I like Metal Slug, they knew when to add new stuff and when to reuse old stuff. And so it's this expert blending of it that I've really come to appreciate, I think, as I come and become older and start to age and stuff. And I kind of look back at it, and I look at it like with kind of this scrutiny almost. It's like, what sucks about it? And maybe I'm looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, but when I go and I look at these older games, I do have things to scrutinize, but at the same time I also have things to praise. And it's like, wow, you know, they know when to add new stuff, and they know when to go and reuse old stuff, and it's just really, really nice. And it's not even exclusive to, I find that it's not even exclusive to Metal Slug. Art of Fighting did that a lot. Let's see, what else? We also had a fair bit of Samurai Showdown doing it as well. Like, Samurai Showdown was actually really, really good about it, because they would use, like, the same character assets a lot of the time, and of course adding the occasional new character, and then the backgrounds were normally, once Samurai Showdown had started to take off, the backgrounds were normally redone and cleaned up, and then they always had nice things going on them and stuff. And so I think that's another really good example of how SNK was really good at just going and reusing assets while adding new assets to make the experience fresh, but to keep it, what in the hell? Oh god, I forgot about this shit. But, while keeping the game familiar enough to give you that level of comfort so you can set the expectation accordingly. And I really wish more developers would learn from that these days. Like, it's either, I find with a lot of development these days, you don't really see, like when it comes to sequels and stuff, you don't really see a proper blending of things too often. It is either all new assets and all of them are dog shit, for the most part, or they use straight up old assets, literally trying to sell you the same game over and over again. And so I really miss the days back when people would go and reuse old assets and then blend it in with new assets, so a game would feel like putting on an old comfy pair of pants while simultaneously being a new experience that is innovative and entertaining for you, you know. God, I forgot how much I enjoy this game. I didn't really like this portion of the game too much. I mean, the storage containers are okay, but some of the positions that the enemies would be on these storage containers was just straight up fucking dickish. And I know that I really probably shouldn't be complaining about dickish behavior out of an SNK game, because that's kind of what they're known for. But at the same time, I'm just kind of sitting here going, God, guys, really? I really enjoy the art assets in the background as well. You know, like when I was filming this one with my godson and stuff, I was kind of sitting a little close to the TV. You know, he was hanging out in the back, just gaming away and stuff, and I'm always really impressed, even all these years later. It's fucking nuts, because a lot of SNK's hardware was literally just a souped up Sega Genesis. And the thing is like, you look at Genesis games, they do look good, but these games look amazing for the time. Like, these are very gorgeous games to go and look at, and I think the art assets actually aged really well. Even when I take the filter off and I leave it in its classic pixel format, everything aged really, really well still. It still looks good. Like, there are some old 16-bit games that I go and I look at, and it's like, oh man, the art for this didn't really age that great. What the hell happened? And then I look at SNK titles, and they have that aesthetic, you know? So I'm sitting close to the TV, and I'm just looking at these backgrounds, and I'm thinking to myself, damn, these actually look really nice still. And then they look even better with a little bit of upscaling and some bilinear filtering and everything else, you know? They look really clean for what they are. And I've always appreciated SNK games because they're always, like, kind of cartoony. You know, like, they always have that Japanese anime aesthetic, which I really, really enjoy. And then the game art doesn't really take itself too seriously either, which is also really, really nice. You know, like, I understand that back in the 16-bit era, games back then, they all looked kind of cartoony, you know, because it was a limitation of the hardware and rendering power and technology, you know, like 3D wasn't a thing yet. Not as we know it today, you know, we didn't have like 80 pixels making up a zit on some character's face, we only had so many. And so a lot of this, well, damn near all of the 16-bit era either used digital scans, you know, with high-end rendering and stuff, as we saw with Donkey Kong Country, or they used just straight-up standardized cartoony pixel art, like what we saw with Mario and a bunch of JRPGs and stuff. But I find that even though those style of games have their own aesthetic as well, I feel that a lot of SNK's titles at the time literally were going for this aesthetic specifically, not because of a hardware limitation, but because they actually wanted to do it. Going and looking at like the old posters and stuff, you realize this. Like, I was looking at an old Mega Man ad, right? And you go and you look at the old Mega Man ad, and Mega Man is depicted as a guy with a blaster, and it has like that 70s and 80s airbrush art aesthetic that you would see on old VHS tapes. And so, like, you would look at the cover art and you'd be like, oh man, that actually looks really good. And then you would go and you would play Mega Man and you'd be like, oh my god, he's only made out of so many pixels. He looks nothing like the cover art. What the hell is this shit? And then with SNK, when you would go and look at an SNK poster, the characters actually look like the art that's depicting them. You know, and it was really interesting because it tells me that SNK wanted to have like some level of cohesion back then, literally. They were like, okay, we're gonna go for the anime aesthetic, and we're gonna make our characters look like this, and we're gonna do our best. And so the funny thing is even with filtering off, the characters still look like that. They look very well, articulated and stuff for what they are, and it looks really, really nice. Now, granted, the lines are a little bit thicker and stuff, and there's some details missing here and there, but, you know, they look like their namesake, essentially. Like, the prisoners look like the prisoners on the poster. The characters look like the characters on the poster. You don't really have to guess. The gun, it's a little under-detailed, but it's 16-bit. I'm not really expecting too much, in all honesty. Now for something that damn small. But you can tell that, like, this is something that SNK was striving for. And, like, we even started to see this carry over later with games like Samurai Showdown. Like, when you look at all the art for the Neo Geo Pocket Color, for all the games, they went with the anime aesthetic for those games as well back then. Neo Geo's earlier games didn't always have this. You know, like, when you look at their earlier games and stuff, a lot of the advertising would not be matching with the game. So a lot of, like, you look at their old baseball posters, right? And a lot of the baseball posters would try to depict fairly realistic-looking human beings, and then, of course, in-game they would be super cartoony. And I noticed that as time had gone on, they had transferred over to the anime aesthetic, you know, for the rest of their games, and, you know, the baseball games were not omitted. And so this wasn't always really a thing with them. And it's really interesting to see how they have evolved with time and stuff. And I noticed with time, the anime aesthetic and the way that they go about designing everything that they do was more or less ingrained into the brand. It had gotten to a point where, you know, you could literally guess if it was an SNK game just by looking at it. You know, like I remember seeing an old poster for Art of Fighting, and they had carried everything over. And I was like, you know, that's an SNK game. It didn't even have SNK anywhere on the poster that was easy to see. Like, there was a small thing of text down in the bottom left-hand corner with, like, all the information, who made it, and everything else, and copyright, and everything else. And, but the rest of the poster, there was no very large emblazoned SNK logo, but you can tell that it was an SNK game just by the art. You can make an intelligent guess with it, and I think that's great because not a lot of companies do that. Not back then, at least. I mean, of course, if you were going and buying a Mario game, you could recognize that it was Nintendo really quick because, you know, they had that aesthetic for Mario down, but with the rest of the games I would see, they would try to go with this very kind of wackadoo, bizarre, you know, late 70s, early 80s airbrushed art aesthetic, and we saw that with Zelda and like a bunch of other games, and you know, you kind of had to guess a little bit because they were trying to treat their games like VHS tapes. You know, like cover art back then, so we didn't really have demos, you know, not like what we had with disc-based games because cartridges were still relatively expensive to produce, so you couldn't just sit there and be like, oh, I'm going to play this demo, and if it's good, I'll buy the game. So a lot of the selling point I find back then was based around what the cover art looked like and how aggressive the advertising was. And so with SNK, they nailed the art aesthetic, and then they also nailed the advertising. Like, you could also tell an SNK advert by the attitude it had. So the 90s typically dripped with attitude. It was easily the attitude era of the last millennia, essentially, you know. And so the thing with SNK is, like, we're literally going to call you a bitch if you can't beat our games. We're going to call you a bitch if you think that you don't even want to play the game. We will call you a pussy, and it is okay. And so you could easily tell an SNK advert by how aggressive it was. You could also tell a Sega advert by how aggressive it was. Like back when Sega and Nintendo were going at it. You know, like, Sega would attack Nintendo all the time. You know, they'd be like, oh, the console's weak, it's for pussies. And then, of course, we had the famous Sega does what Nintendo don't advertising campaign as well. So, you know, back then, you know, you could easily tell most of the time who was advertising by the content of the ad and stuff. Like, Sega was doing it, SNK was doing it. Nintendo was kind of strange about it. Like, Nintendo was trying to sell the fantasy idea of it, but a lot of the advertising was, like, really cringe. You know, I think that one of the worst adverts I had seen back then was for the Virtual Boy. Oh man, that fucking thing was awful. Oh, holy shit. That is literally a conversation in its own right. But I remember going and seeing, to give you an idea of how bad the advertising was, I remember going and seeing an advert for it, and it shows the kid, right? And he's going, and he's on the Virtual Boy, and it shows him laying down, and he's got the Virtual Boy on his face, and he's got the controller in his hand, and, you know, it looks like he's supposed to be having fun, and then you go and you look at the child, and you realize the way that his mouth is shaped, it looks like he's screaming. And it is just so fucking weird, and I remember just, like, seeing that and going, you know, I don't think I'd actually want to buy that. It doesn't actually look like a game console, kind of looks like a torture device. Kid doesn't really look like he's having too much fun. You know, so advertising back then was really wild. You know, like the 90s kind of dripped with attitude. There was like a lot of good advertising, there was a lot of bad advertising. I feel like Nintendo kind of missed the mark with a lot of their advertising and stuff, and people would be like, oh, well, it's just Nintendo being Nintendo. But on the flip side, Nintendo and SNK would kind of brawl a little bit as well with their adverts. Nintendo would try to sell the fantasy idea of, like, there was, like, once an ad where they were going and advertising the Super Scope, right? And it was basically a light gun that you would use on the SNES, and it took up a shit ton of fucking batteries to use, and then the sensor for it was, like, really bad. It wasn't really the greatest. But they would sell the fantasy idea of it because it would show, like, a kid using it, and there would be various enemies in the background. And I remember one of the advertisements was always keep them in your sights, you know, because the Super Scope had like a little tiny view scope on it as well that you could look through, and it was supposed to be super cool. And, you know, like, it was one of those things, you know, there would normally be digitized art in the background, like a grid or something, and it was definitely trying to sell the 80s a little bit there as well, you know, the whole digitization era that the 80s was kind of known for a little bit. And then you had companies like SNK, they would go and attack Nintendo, and then they would be like, you need to have balls to play this, when they were going and advertising the AES. And it was very interesting because there was other companies that were doing similar ads where they're like, you have to have a pair of these to play, you know, one of these. And it was just really interesting back then how people would actually go about doing advertisement. It was a weird combination of unique art forms, slogans, all that crap. But I think, strangely enough, even though the AES didn't really sell super well, I think that SNK had the best advertising campaign in terms of cohesion between slogans and art and everything else. And, like, when you went to go and play an SNK game, you knew that you were in for a badass experience. And it was really nice, you know? Like, you could sit down and be like, oh man, you know, this game is gonna be bitchin', look at all these guns, look at these enemies, look how pissed they are. And, you know, a lot of their advertising slogans were meant to get you pumped as well, you know, and it was just a very interesting time to be alive, I think. But strangely enough, I found myself enjoying it, you know, and you just don't see stuff like that anymore. You don't really see aggressive advertising. You don't even see ads of companies making fun of other companies. Like, I really miss the adverts of, like, Nintendo and Sega shitting on each other. You know, like, I really miss that a lot, you know, and I just don't really see adverts like that anymore. I think the last good advert that I had seen was for Onimusha Warlords. And, like, Capcom was on point with it. My family was watching WWF at the time, back when it was still WWF. And Capcom had squeezed in, I think it was like a 20-second ad. And it was just like them trying to sell the game as a survival horror title. They're like, you will survive, you will fight, but you may not make it out. And it just shows Samanosuke fucking people up in a quick, you know, small snippet of cutscene, sorry. Well, maybe the screen was cut, I don't know. But, you know, I haven't seen, like, really just kind of interesting advertisements anymore. Like, I don't really see games advertised a lot. If I go to YouTube, I have a tendency to see a shit ton of advertisements for, like, mobile games. Here's looking at you, Raid Shadow Legends. But I don't really see full advertisements for, like, AAA titles anymore. I just don't. I don't know if maybe I'm just looking at the wrong stuff or what, but I just don't really see them anymore. And it's just really, really strange. You know, at least I think it is. So, I really miss that edge, essentially. I miss watching companies dunk on each other. You know, nowadays advertisements have to go and be light and fluffy, and like Microsoft for the Xbox Series X was like, power your dreams, which I was like, okay, that's fair. And then Sony hasn't really had a stable one for like a really long time. Like, they swap up so much that it's like not even funny. And then I never really see Sony and Microsoft dunking on each other, aside from this debacle with fucking Microsoft trying to buy out Activision. You know, like, I just don't really see it anymore. I don't see a lot of these companies trying to compel gamers to go over to their platform. I don't see humorous advertisements anymore. You know, like, I would totally pay for Microsoft to make a fucking advert where they were like, oh yes, pick Xbox. And then, like, have a child on the screen and the child being like, why would I want an Xbox? And then just be like, because the PlayStation's for pussies. Like, I would totally fucking laugh at that. I don't see edginess in adverts anymore. I don't see humor in adverts anymore. Half the time when they do advertise a game these days, you have no idea what the fuck it's for. You don't even know what kind of game it is. Like, I was watching a fucking advert for Genshin Impact the other day, and it was literally just 30 seconds. 30 full fucking seconds of staring at an empty field with grass rustling in the background. Now, don't get me wrong, that shit's great for ASMR. I totally fucking get it. But as a gamer, if you are going to sell me on your game, if you want me to get up off my ass and go to the Play Store and download your crap and then potentially give you money for playing it, demonstrate what kind of game I'm getting into. Show me some action scenes. Show me some in-game footage of like a randomized character going and fucking up enemies and shit. Show me, you know, what kind of game you are trying to sell so I, as a consumer, can go and make the choice on whether or not I want to go or not go and invest in the game. I saw the same goddamn thing with Diablo Immortal because I've been getting a lot of adverts for that crap. And, like, they don't, like... So everybody recognizes Diablo. Okay, that's fair. But for all the people that have never played, like, the franchise that's really old by now, you know, show them gameplay. You know, show them segments of story, something, anything. The only advert that they have shown for Diablo Immortal is literally available now. And it just shows, like, a character's face, and that's it. That's literally it. You know, like, they don't really give you much to really go off of. So at that point, they're literally banking on the customer's curiosity to find out what the fuck that advert was for. You know, and it's really weird how they're going about doing it. You know, like, if you're going to advertise your game, spend some money on it. Like, literally, go make a really nice advert for it, show it off a little bit, you know, do what an advert is supposed to do, and sell the fucking game, essentially. But it's so weird, like, ads are like entering their we're gonna be obscure as fuck and not even tell you what's going on stage. You know, and it's just really odd. And I see it with print ads a lot as well. Like, I finally picked up a magazine the other day, popped out the magnifying glass, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to read this shit, because I got the magazine for free, alright, whatever. And when I was, like, thumbing through ads, it was for a season pass for, like, a game, and yet they wouldn't tell you what the hell was in the season pass. They wouldn't even tell you why the season pass was entertaining. They wouldn't tell you what modes would be included. They literally did nothing. It was a one-page ad that had an assault rifle on it and it said, "Are you ready for it?" Didn't even mention the game clearly for you to understand what game it was for. It was, much like that SNK poster, in a small-ass thing of text in the bottom of the goddamn corner. I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this crap and it's like, you know, developers are complaining that their games are selling poorly. But from an advertising perspective, what are they going and doing to try to sell the game? Like, honestly, I mean, companies don't release demos anymore. They can't rely on that. They're so afraid of the game flopping that they're afraid to release demos now. Like, oh, we can't release a demo if it's received poorly. Oh, there goes 4 years of development. You know, so a lot of it would be reliant on either it being a sequel, you know, so people, like, can go and make the, oh, it's an established franchise that I know I'm going to enjoy purchase decision, and that would, could be followed up with paper adverts, well, any kind of advert, really, on YouTube or commercial, whatever, where the advert is really interesting, shows off gameplay, or maybe story snippets, you know, that draws your attention and stuff. Like, advertising is so minimal these days, and half the fucking time I don't even know what the fuck they're advertising for. And it's weird. You can't always go and, do minimalist advertising like that, especially if they don't even know what the hell the game's name is. There was a fucking advertisement for a goddamn war game the other day. Didn't even tell me what the title of the war game is. It just shows like a bunch of tanks fucking each other up, and it's like available now. Okay. And then like underneath available now, it said place your pre-order today. Okay, that's all well and good. But one, the advertisement's short. All of the info was in a small ass block of text in the corner. So the question that I find myself asking is, as a consumer, how the fuck do you expect me to check your game out if you won't even tell me what the name of your game is? Hiding it in a small ass block of text in the corner is not a good solution. I'm sorry. No, it's a bad fucking idea. If you want people to be excited about your game, if you're gonna spout off bullshit like pre-order now, available now, all this shit, tell me the name of your game so I can go and look that shit up. That's all you gotta do. It's not that hard. Developers, please, for fuck's sake, advertise your shit better. It's fucking weird when you give me incoherent data. You know, like as a consumer, I wanna know the name. Make a witty commercial, make it funny. Everybody's like, oh my god, we don't understand how Raid Shadow Legends got as big as it did. Because its advertising campaign was fucking aggressive. And it wasn't just aggressive, it was funny. They understood what it took to sell that shit. You know, like I was looking, because I fuck off on YouTube a fair bit, right? You know, I got my stuff I listen to. And they went and they were doing like an anniversary commercial for Raid's, event that they have going on for the 4-year anniversary they have. And they wasn't vague, it wasn't stupid, it didn't say available now. It was like, hey, we're gonna make a funny fucking commercial, and then we're gonna tell you that we have an event going on, and then we're gonna give you a promo code at the end to try to draw you in. Intelligent advertising. Done by a much smaller company. We have AAA developers that literally spend millions upon millions of dollars on these fucking games, and yet they still can't figure out how to advertise their bullshit correctly. Honestly, what the fuck are you guys doing? How are these smaller companies doing it better? It really shouldn't be like this. But it is what it is, I digress. You know, we don't have good ads really anymore. You know, it's not like the SNK and SNES days, you know, where they tried to have some level of cohesion with it. You know, they tried to make the brand able to be identified easily. We don't get that anymore. And it's really just kind of a hell of a thing. It really is. It really knocks me on my ass. Like, full stop dead ass. It fucking knocks me on my ass to realize that a lot of these smaller companies are doing it better. Now, AAA companies do not want to admit that. They do not want to admit that smaller companies are cramming their dicks up their ass and selling better. You know, they just want to be like, oh, well, people will buy it because, you know, they always sell. And then when a game flops, they were like, well, what happened? I have watched plenty of good games, actually good games, go and fail to meet sales expectations because they could not advertise it correctly. Literally, I've watched that shit flop so fucking hard, and it sucks because they're good games that deserve the support, that have good teams, and yet the mistake they made was not advertising it correctly. And then later on, the fucking publisher is like, we don't want to fund another copy of this game. You know, why? Oh, it didn't meet sales expectations. And yet you go and you talk to people and it's like, hey, were you aware that this game was released? And everybody's like, no, I'm not even aware that it fucking exists. You know, and so with proper advertising, you know, you got to spend money to make money. That's how that is. It's an unfortunate fact of life, but it is what it is. And so I see like a lot of these advertisements, they're either incoherent, non-existent, you know, like they don't really understand a lot of the time what the consumer wants. If you go and you ask somebody, hey, if somebody's advertising, you know, what the hell are you looking for in an ad that would potentially sell it? A lot of people cite humor. Strangely enough, funny adverts make the advert more memorable because you'll get a bunch of people that are literally sitting around talking about something that's funny. Especially Americans. Humor drives us, literally. Like, I'll be sitting down talking with some friends, and they'll just be going and memeing it up. And they'll be like, hey, do you remember this? And, you know, I'll be like, yeah, I remember that, but the only reason we remember is because it made us laugh. It left a positive imprint on us. You know, when something is funny like that, it leaves a very positive imprint, and you're more likely to remember it and go back to it later. Same thing with negative imprints as well, but you don't really want negative imprints when advertising gaming, you know? Because people play games to be entertained, and leaving negative imprints like that is not generally the best thing to do when it comes to going and advertising your game, because they want to have a happy experience with it, and you really just don't want that shit shackled to it. Negative imprinting is better for like when you want to try to go and drum up for politics, or if you want to go and like help a fucking charity or some. Charities use a lot of negative imprinting. You know, they're like, we have all these people dying, and for like 20 cents a day, you too can support them, and so they use a lot of negative imprinting to have it get stuck in your head, essentially, so you can't really forget it, and you're more likely to donate at that point. So it's really just one of those oddball things, I think. You know, I think, like, when it comes to things like that with imprinting in general, for me, I would go more towards humor. Humor or inspiration, in all honesty. Like, with humor and stuff, it's self-explanatory, it's funny, you're more likely to go and remember it. And then with inspiration, with an advert, I'd rather be pumped, essentially. You know, like, I think the last advert that I had seen that really got me pumped, weirdly enough, was Devil May Cry. Like, when they were going and doing the new Devil May Cry that everybody said that they hated, but couldn't really quite explain why they hated it. They just hated it, even though it was just the same game, essentially, with a fucking aesthetic swap. You know, like, I remember watching the ad for that when I was much younger, and it was literally going and inspiring you, and I think, like, the slogan was, be a badass demon slayer. And I remember seeing that stuff, and, you know, it gets you pumped, right? Like, you're kind of sitting there, and you're like, oh, man, this is inspirational as fuck. I'm feeling swole as hell. You know, I'm ready to fuck shit up. And, you know, like, that's an example of proper inspirational advertising. You know, like, get your player excited. Get your potential player ready to go. You know, and sell the power fantasy. You know, be baller as hell about it. And we just don't really see it too often. I think that the reason why game sales are declining the way that they are is it is a combination of bad advertising and equally bad development. Gaming really just is not what it used to be. I know it's very stereotypical and formulaic to say, but there's a large amount of truth to it. Games don't ship finished anymore. You know, a lot of the times they're very buggy. You know, with the we'll patch it later mentality, and you know, they'll do ads, you won't even understand what the hell the ad is for. A lot of times companies will advertise things like a season pass, or like they'll go and advertise a new expansion pack, and they won't even tell you, you know, what it's for. Destiny was pretty fucking awful in this regard. EA and Activision do this fucking shit too, where they just don't even really give you any info. It just says, available now, buy it today. Doesn't even tell you what game it is. Well, with Bungie, everybody already knows, because their only IP currently that they're working on is Destiny, and when they have that aesthetic, which, you know, there you go, it makes it recognizable, much like a lot of things that Blizzard makes. You know, their aesthetic, very recognizable. But with Activision and EA in general, they're like, oh yeah, buy it now, available now, or new pass, available now, buy it today. You know, we see this with Call of Duty a lot, you know, with like the various contents they release and stuff, and the thing is like, you know, if you're going to be selling something, don't be afraid to tell your customer about it. If the content's good, if the content's worth a damn, and you're particularly proud of like one thing in general, show it off. Be like, yo, if you go and you buy our season pass today, you can have access to this gun. You can have access to this totally ass-stomping, game-breaking gun, you know, but you never really see it, you know, like they don't really, I find a lot of major developers and publishers don't really actually want you to know much about the game. It actually, well, the content in general that they're selling, it feels like a lot of cloak and dagger crap. You know, it's like, oh, we can't tell them too much about it. They may not be satisfied. So it kind of feels like they're trying to hoodwink your ass a little bit. And it's very oddball. And, like, in that respect, you know, it's like, buy it today. Okay, what am I buying? Just buy it today. Okay, that's great. Do we even have a price point? Buy it today. And it's like, all right, dudes, you know. We can't really be doing this, and it's fucking insane. It really, it truly is. It's really fucking nuts. But no, it feels like, you know, the reason why I like these older games, the reason why I like Metal Slug is because the advertising was on point, the art direction was on point, it was cohesive, it was incredibly easy to recognize. You knew that the game was going to be finished, you know, because obviously it's an arcade game, it would have to be finished to make it into a cabinet. You know, it was just, things were just a lot better back then, I think. Like, everything was very cohesive, and you understood what the hell it was you were getting. You understood what the company wanted to do. Ah, SNK game, I can expect to be robbed completely fucking blind, and then go and, you know, I know the graphics are going to be amazing. I know it's going to be a lot of shooting. I know my hands are going to be cramping by the time I'm done. You know, just all this stuff, essentially. Nowadays, you just don't get it anymore. Like, they don't want you to know what kind of product they're making. They don't want you to know what's in it, because if you see something you don't like, oh, you may not buy it. There's a lot of cloak and dagger with it. And the older I get, the more I start to loathe that. Like, a lot. You know, because I feel like advertising is very rarely, if ever, honest, but it feels like it's kind of at an all-time low, and I don't really care for that too much. Like, I haven't really seen, I haven't really seen any company in quite some time actually go out of their way to try to actually sell me a game. You know what I mean? Like, I've never, not in recent memory, per se, I haven't seen a company literally go and try to sell me the experience, try to tell me that I'm going to have a good time. I've never seen a company in recent memory go and be like, oh, these are the improvements that we have made. Like, I just never really see it. They just want to demand that you go and buy their stuff, but they don't really want to tell you anything about it, and I find it to be incredibly fucking shifty. You know, it's just not really great, and it actually holds me back from purchases, believe it or not. A lot of people are like, that doesn't stop people from buying it. Yeah, it does. It really does. You know, and so it's very oddball, you know, and there's been a lot of games that are actually surprisingly good that I missed out on because the advertising for them was so fucking bad that I had no fucking clue what they were trying to sell. Like, literally, I had no clue. Oh, what is it? Oh. What are some examples of shit like that? Let's see. Mortal Shell was kind of like that. Like, Mortal Shell, I showed up to the party late with, even though it's actually pretty fucking good for what it is, because the advert for it was literally a sword in the ground, and that was it. No text, just a sword in the ground, and it was really weird. Another good game that I had missed out on was, strangely enough, Ultra Age on the Switch. Ultra Age is actually pretty good. It's a very solid game because the advertisement for it was very minimal and gave no examples of, like, gameplay and stuff. It was really strange in that regard. Like, I find some of the best games I have ever played have either had really bad ads or no ads. Like, a lot of indie developers, I noticed that they're not really going to have ads because they're indie devs and they probably can't afford it, with the budget already being kind of shoestring as it is. Like, I know that Dusk was like that. The only reason I was even aware that Dusk exists is because a YouTuber that I like to watch had advertised it. I was completely and utterly fucking aware of a lot of Night Dive Studios' projects being happening and stuff, because I just never saw an ad for it. Like, there's plenty of good games out there. Gaming is not entirely dead. I mean, well, AAA gaming is kind of dead, but some of the best stuff I've played, I literally just wouldn't even be aware of its existence because of a lack of advertisements or bad advertisements. Proteus, another boomer shooter that I love playing. Oh my god, so good. I was grossly unaware that it existed because of no advertisements. But no, I really think about it a lot, and it's kind of a stark contrast between playing SNK games in the 90s versus going and trying to play games these days. Back in the day, SNK was very aggressive with their adverts, you know, they were witty with their adverts, they were very aggressive with them, you know, they had good art, like everything just felt good. And nowadays, we don't even really get that. I really miss that shit. Like, I remember watching an SNK cabinet roll into the arcade, and every SNK cabinet came with a poster. And the owner of the arcade would literally go, there was glass walls all over the place, he would go flip that poster around, run it up against that glass, and tape it into place. And that was how you knew that the game was there, and the advertisement was cohesive enough to where you could figure out pretty easily how much money you were going to lose and whether or not you were going to enjoy yourself. And we just really just don't get that anymore, and it really just fucking sucks. I miss being excited for games. I really do. Nowadays, developers are so scared shitless of everything under the goddamn sun. They're like, we can't do demos if they don't like it, it impacts sales. We don't really want to go and do a full-blown advertisement with a TV spot because if we show off something people don't like, it's going to impact sales. Like, a lot of publishers are so scared shitless of losing money on these goddamn projects of theirs that they don't really actually want to tell anybody what the hell is going on. And I find it incredibly fucking deceitful. Like, actually deceitful, and it's just really obnoxious, and I just really wish that gaming was in a better place in that regard for it. I really do. But this has been the commentary for Metal Slug 4, and I know that there wasn't so much a commentary on the game. Like, it bobs in and out, but this is mainly supposed to be a series about SNK games and stuff, and I like talking about SNK in general. And with Metal Slug being Metal Slug, there's only so much you can cover, guys. Sorry, that's just how it is. So, we are going to be back with Metal Slug 5 pretty soon. I have it in the works. I may work on it tonight. I don't know. So, for those that actually stuck around for the video, I greatly appreciate your time and your effort while I kind of ramble incoherently into the phone, as I normally typically have a tendency to do. But I hope you had a good time. I had a good time making this and stuff, and I will see you all very soon. Till next time.